Have you ever found yourself sticking with something familiar, even when you know deep down there's a better way? Well, it turns out there's a powerful, kind of invisible force that shapes those choices. And today, we're going to break down exactly how it works. Let's get into it.
Picture this. You're in a job, it's fine, I guess. It pays the bills, but it's not fulfilling, and you get that Sunday night dread. But you stay. You tell yourself it's not that bad.
Or how about this one? That clunky old software you have to use at work, or maybe even the way your kitchen is organized. It's not efficient, it kind of bugs you every single day, but the thought of actually changing it, it just feels like way too much work.
Now, here's what's really fascinating. We often call this feeling comfort or stability, but actually, it's neither of those things. It's a well-documented cognitive bias. Think of it like a little glitch in our mental software that quietly steers us away from change.
All right, so let's put a name to this invisible force. Let's define this thing that has such a strong pull, keeping us right where we are. It is called the status quo bias. At its core, it's our brain's natural preference for things to just stay the same. And the most important part of that definition is this phrase right here, even when better alternatives exist. So this isn't about you making a rational choice for the best option, it's about your brain unconsciously favoring the one you already have. And the logic behind it, well, it's actually pretty simple. Our brains are basically wired to see change as a potential risk. The unknown could be dangerous, but the familiar, even if it's got flaws, it feels predictable, and predictable feels safe.
And that's how it gets us. We don't really actively choose to stay put. Instead, doing nothing becomes its own kind of decision. The default option wins the race without ever really having to run.
And look, this isn't just some abstract idea from a psychology textbook. This bias is a real, powerful force that shows up all the time in our lives, from our biggest decisions right down to our smallest daily habits. So, let's circle back to that job. The situation is pretty clear. You're not happy, but then the bias kicks in. Because, looking for a new job, doing interviews, starting all over, that takes a ton of effort, and it means facing the unknown. So what's the result? We stay, telling ourselves the devil we know is better than the one we don't.
Think about your phone or the apps you use every day. There's probably a better, faster, maybe even cheaper option out there. But the bias just whispers in your ear that learning a new system takes time and energy. So your current choice just rolls over, year after year, becoming the default decision.
And this thing doesn't just affect us as individuals, it scales all the way up to society. You see inefficient laws, outdated company policies, or traditions that make no sense, and they just stick around for decades. Why? Because the idea of changing them feels way more disruptive than the low-grade annoyance of keeping them. The system survives just because, well, it's the system.
Okay, so we can see it in action all around us. But what's actually happening inside our heads that makes this pull so incredibly strong? Let's dive into the psychology of it.
It really boils down to three main forces. First, there's the fear of loss. We humans feel the sting of a loss way more than we feel the joy of an equal gain. Second, effort avoidance. Our brains are built to conserve energy, and let's face it, change requires thinking and acting. And third, responsibility avoidance. See, if you make a change and it goes wrong, that feels like it's on you. If you do nothing and things are just okay, it somehow feels less like your fault.
When you put all that together, you get this one crucial takeaway. When our brain is faced with a choice between doing nothing and doing something that has even a tiny bit of risk, it's almost always going to lean towards doing nothing. And this right here is the great deception of the status quo bias. We mistake this lack of movement for security. We're looking at stagnation, but our brain processes it as stability, and that feels good and safe. And this is exactly why it's so critical to recognize. This bias isn't harmless. It's what traps us in bad jobs and relationships. It's what slows down innovation in companies. It's what keeps broken systems in place. And maybe worst of all, it's what prevents our own personal growth by making good enough feel like the finish line.
But here's the good news. We are not powerless here. We can absolutely build a mental toolkit to fight back against this bias and start making choices that are more intentional. So let's look at how we can do that.
And let's be super clear, the goal isn't to just chase change for the sake of it. The real goal is to give new options a fair fight, to evaluate them on their own merits, without our thumbs secretly pressing down on the scale for the default option.
Here are 4 really powerful techniques. Number 1, remove the default. Whenever you can, set things up so you have to make an active choice, not just accept the status quo. 2. Ask the counterfactual question, which we'll get to in a second. 3. Run small experiments. Test out a change temporarily. It lowers the stakes. And 4. Consciously separate the idea of risk from the feeling of familiarity. Just because something feels familiar doesn't mean it's the safest bet in the long run.
Now, I really want to pause on this question because it might be the single most powerful tool you have against this bias. Ask yourself this about your job, your habits, anything. If I were starting from scratch right now, is this the option I would actually actively choose? The answer can be incredibly eye-opening.
So here's the ultimate takeaway. The status quo bias tricks us into thinking that staying the same is a passive, neutral thing. But it's not. It is an active choice, and it deserves just as much thought and scrutiny as any decision to change. It should not get a free pass.
Every bit of progress, whether it's in our own lives, in technology, or in society, it all starts in the exact same place, with someone looking at the way things are and having the courage to ask, hey, is this really the best we can do? Questioning the default isn't about chaos, it's about being intentional. And that right there is where all progress really begins.